In this world of realignment, it's clear that conferences are aware of the brand power of UConn. Today, we'll talk about that and much more. You're Locked On UConn.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we dive into today's show, just wanted to take a quick moment to ask for a small favor. If you're enjoying the content, please take a second to subscribe. Follow the audio versions wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Spotify, anything, all that helps. It helps the show grow. I truly appreciate the support. And also, every follow, subscription on YouTube, and download helps create more revenue for UConn NIL. Locked On UConn is donating 10% of all revenue to Bleeding Blue for Good. So by supporting this show, you're directly supporting the UConn NIL efforts. Thank you for being a part of that community and the Locked On UConn community. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Please place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's show, I'm excited to dive into that topic of conference realignment. It seems like a topic that just doesn't go away with UConn AD David Benedict. Let's bring him on the program. David, thanks for joining us. I'll ask the question that I think most people in UConn Nation are curious about. You've helped build this brand that UConn is in its current form. You've been here for almost a decade, and that brand seems to garner a lot of attention, specifically with other conferences in this realignment world. What should UConn fans be thinking about when it comes to conference realignment and really the landscape of college athletics as a whole?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I appreciate you having me on today. And, I guess the way I would approach it is sort of to focus on the latter part of what you said, which is what should our fans be focused on? And I think, there's the short term and the long term. We have to be focused on both. And from a short term standpoint, we're in a great situation. We have a great relationship with the Big East. It's obviously put us in a position that we believed could be achievable when we made the decision to leave the American to go to the Big East. We're back in the national conversation. We're back to being extremely relevant, in my opinion, and I'm not sure that there's many people that could argue the fact that we have the best basketball brand, bar none, in the country right now, and obviously that doesn't include just our men. It includes both our programs. And so I think from that standpoint, people should appreciate the fact that by getting back to a place of relevance nationally, where we're in the conversation anytime anyone wants to talk about college basketball, that's put us back in a very desirable position. We do sit in between two of the largest media markets in the country, with Boston and New York. The overall media market in the greater Hartford, New Haven area is in the low 30s, and so we're in a very desirable media market landscape. And so when you combine that with success, you put yourself in a very desirable position. But what I would say is that while we're going to always be active in conversation, because ultimately it's my job to make sure that we're not just focused on the short term, but the long term, that we have to be responsible and make sure that we're paying attention to what's going on in intercollegiate athletics. And I think, as I've said many other times, the only thing that is constant is change. And college athletics is probably going through the most significant transformation of my career. And I've been doing this for over 25 years, almost 30 years now, which is hard to believe. So whether it's the current iterations of conversations that have been taking place, or if it was last summer, or if it's what's going on in the ACC, there's going to be constant conversation. And I'm not so sure that the next 5 to 10 years, things don't dramatically shift to where maybe conference affiliation is not the way we typically think about it today. And so the thing that we have to focus on is being extremely competitive in as many sports as we possibly can be, and football is a critical piece of that. And so, very excited about the start that we've had this year. I think Coach Mora in his third year has done a tremendous job. And what I would tell our fans and the listeners to your show is NIL and the potential of revenue sharing is a difference maker for us. It's a level setter because, in New England, we have some really, really talented prospects coming out of New England in the prep schools and in other very good traditional high school programs, but they're not as plentiful. And the fact that we don't have that, when we were in the Big East, the old Big East, we had the BCS halo of being a part of the BCS conferences. Because we're now not a part of that power structure, as the media likes to refer to, the P4, it costs us in recruiting. And so, NIL and revenue sharing has the ability, as we are currently seeing it play out, to allow us to recruit differently than we have since I've been here. And so, we're very fortunate that we've had some support. Not just for football, but for a lot of our sport programs, providing opportunities to student athletes. But I'm excited about the future because of it. I know philosophically some people don't agree with it, but it's can be a boon for us, especially in the sport of football. So, specifics, I'm happy to answer or try to answer some other questions that you might have specifically about conference realignment. But the thing that I'm focused on is long-term. You just don't know how things are going to play out, and nobody has a crystal ball. But in college athletics, typically you follow the money, and the money is going to continue to aggregate around the best brands in the country, regardless of conference. And so I think that's the kind of conversation that you're starting to see crop up in these conferences, where Clemson and Florida State, feel like they're bringing more value to that conference than other members, and they want a bigger share of it.
No, it makes sense. And I appreciate you going over that. I think the only other question I wanted to kind of touch on with conference realignment is I wonder, do you feel vindicated when you hear coaches like, because most of this realignment talk is centered around football, as you mentioned. Do you feel vindicated when you hear coaches like Tom Herman or Pete Lembo essentially gush about the work that's been done at UConn to reinvigorate the football program?
I think it's certainly a compliment, and it's nice to hear people, especially coming from programs that have been relatively successful over the last decade, say, hey, we need to find out what they're doing and start doing something similar. So that's obviously a big change in what the narrative is. But, being on the inside of it, all sports, regardless of whether it's in college sports or professional sports, it's about talent acquisition. Coaches play a significant role in the overall success of your program, but you have to have talent. And so our ability to acquire talent now is in a different place. And because of that, and because of the facilities we have, and because of the great institution that we have, the great markets that we reside in and are around, I think we're positioned extremely well in the future.
Okay. Listen, I appreciate you going over a few points of that. When we come back, I want to hear about the brand of UConn in the future, have some questions around that. And then looking forward to, you've mentioned NIL and future revenue sharing. want to talk about that in not that maybe not detail. You can just kind of give me your thoughts, but we'll talk about that coming back from the break. Hey, NFL fans, you can start this season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, like, man, I think I'm going to try to add a live bet or, do a parlay for whatever the case is, you're seeing this, you can check out these latest stats and view live play-by-play and so much more on the same page, and also place your bets. You don't have to keep going back and forth either on your phone or a desktop. So you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Go to FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, we're back on Locked On UConn with Husky AD David Benedict. Thanks for joining us today, David. My first question around, like we talked about in the open, you've been a significant part of building this brand of what UConn is currently. As we continue to grow at UConn, how do you see the brand evolving, say, over the next 5-10 years, both on and off the field? You can take that as wide or as narrow as you want. But what's the broader vision for UConn? It may not even have anything to do with conference realignment, and it's a big piece, but what are your thoughts on that, both on and off the field?
Yeah, it's a huge question from the standpoint there's so many different directions that you could go, and there's so many things that impact the brand. But ultimately, I think we should feel really good about where we're at currently, because in this time of dramatic change, the big brands that have national reputations, I think are positioned, better than those that are trying to get there. And so when you have a situation where you have the best brands in college basketball, it puts you at a great place. The investments that our university has made from a facility standpoint, I've had some people recently that visited campus that said that we would be in the upper third quartile of facilities plants overall, with several of the Power Four conferences. And so it makes you feel good that you're positioned well from a success standpoint, you're positioned well from a facility standpoint, and it really prepares you to go into this new era of, whether it's NIL, and hopefully we'll learn more. I know there's a hearing going on today about the House case. Hopefully we'll get some finality and direction as it relates to how things are going to move forward. But I'm assuming at some point in time that we're going to be in the era of revenue sharing. And look, it in college athletics, it doesn't ever seem to be that the cost of being competitive is going down. And so this is a reality. If you want to be great in college athletics, if you want to compete at a national level, regardless of sport, you have to have resources. And those resources in the past have been related to facilities or different type of support, whether it's nutrition or whether it's food or whether it's facilities. Now we're entering into a new area where now the experience and the coaches and the facilities is kind of the baseline. And so you have to now create a new budget model, which will shift how we invest over a period of time. But you're going to have to invest in talent acquisition in a different way than what we have in the past.
Yeah, and you brought this up, so I'll ask it because there was talks, in the first round of, whether it's the Big 12 and now the Pac-12 of Conference Realignment, the scuttlebutt, if you will, on the socials was, hey, if they're going to go to a P4 or P3 conference, there has to be a stadium on campus. Is there a serious movement to get that done now or in the future? It's definitely a question that was asked of me when I knew that you were going to come on from some former alum or current alum, and also just people that go to games. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that and what that could potentially bring to UConn.
Yeah, Mark, I think it's a fair question, and look, UConn is a very unique situation. I don't know that there's any place other than UConn in the country where you have multiple teams playing a significant number of their games off campus, and so that's just part of the culture and history at UConn. And while certainly one could point out that there could be some disadvantages in that, or challenges, there's probably also some benefits in certain ways. But look, I am a very rational thinker. And in my rational mind, Mark, it's hard to suggest that we're going to start having a conversation about spending the kind of money that it would require to build a football stadium in this environment, economically, when we're not getting it done at the current stadium that we have. And Rentschler Stadium is a very nice facility. It would it be beneficial to have it, on Horse Barn Hill, or somewhere that was obviously much closer to campus? Of course, there would be benefits there. But we're very fortunate that we have a really nice facility. It's easily accessible to our fan base. There's great parking and tailgating areas around the stadium, and so and shoot, the field surface is as good as as I've seen in the country. And so there's a ton of positives there. I was actually just meeting earlier today with the mayor of East Hartford, and we've got to find a way to make our football program and the community around Rentschler Field in East Hartford really take ownership of that facility and our program. But we've got to do a better job of filling up the stadium like we used to. And when we get to that point and we're consistently winning, maybe that's the time where you can begin to have that conversation. But as of right now, we're focused on what the main thing is. And the main thing is becoming very competitive and winning enough games every year to make sure that we're going to bowl games.
Yeah, no, that makes, as you said, you're a rational thinker. That makes a lot of sense. And we're on, I think we're on the right path. Team's playing really well and got a big game coming up on my birthday, nonetheless, on Saturday. So I'm hopefully celebrating a UConn win. When we come back, we're going to talk about the revenue sharing opportunities that are going to be in place in the college athletics world and NIL and plans that UConn has, and with David Benedict here coming up after this. This episode is in part brought to you by PrizePicks, the #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active users. PrizePicks is super simple. Just pick 2 to 6 players, and if they hit their projections, you can win up to 100 times your money. PrizePicks even offers an injury insurance policy, so if one of your players gets injured in the first half, your lineup still stays the same. And here's a bonus. Download the PrizePicks app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly when you make your first $5 deposit. That's code LOCKEDONCollege on PrizePicks for $50 free. No need to win. The bonus is guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. And quick turnaround. We're back with David Benedict, Husky AD. David, I really appreciate you, shedding some light on a few different things today. You mentioned the hearing on revenue sharing, what that's going to look like potentially in the future. I'm curious. I have 2 really, I feel like, important questions. I think the first one is, I think there's, especially UConn alum folks that adore the University of Connecticut, want to understand what the potential revenue sharing models, how they'll impact the non-revenue sports at UConn. I myself was a tennis player in college. You know what I mean? Like, these are sports that are also a big part of UConn athletics. And I know that they don't get, I don't talk about the UConn tennis team. I don't talk about field hockey winning national championships. The revenue sharing sports are what we mostly talk about on shows like this. So, but we acknowledge that these kids work really hard. And I'm curious, what do you see as how do we help make sure that we continue to have those sports and keep the rich history of UConn non-revenue sports going?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of conversations. You hear a lot of different thoughts as it relates to how things are going to move forward. The case, the House case that is ongoing, and there's several other cases that are kind of intertwined into this potential settlement, which, as I pointed out earlier, hopefully we get some resolution to this soon, so that we really can plan for things. But there's a lot of things to take into consideration when you begin to think about how you would share money. First of all, you have to have money to share. And, right now, as most people that are familiar with UConn and the finances of our athletic department, you know that the university supports us to the tune of about $30 million. We've been able to bring that down over the last several years, but it's still a significant investment that they're making. So, hard to imagine that where you're in a position where your P&L is what it is, that you have money to share. But I think the thing that you have to focus on is what you said. There's revenue sports and there's non-revenue sports, and it's pretty easy to determine the ones that generate revenue. And we're not saying that it's profit sharing. We're saying it's revenue sharing. And so those are two different things. We don't have profitable sports. Most places don't. The very large football programs around the country are profitable, partly because they sell, a significant number of tickets on each home game Saturday that they have. But the biggest piece is the media dollars. And, as to our earlier conversation around conference realignment, one of the major disadvantages to not being in the power conference structure is the difference in revenue that's associated with the media contracts. And so we're in a position where we're trying to compete at a national level in many of our sports. Baseball's a great example. Baseball is, has been as competitive as anybody, certainly outside of the power conference structure. But, going to two super regionals in the last 3 years and having to go on the road pretty much every year in a regional situation and being able to win 2 out of the 3 years is really a testament to what Coach Penders has done. And we've got other sports that are on the precipice of becoming nationally competitive again. Our men's soccer team is ranked for the first time in many years. And so, look, we're going to do everything we can to continue to invest at a level that we can be competitive. And then we have to figure out, if we want to remain competitive in the very highest profile sports, how do we have to fund them in this new budgetary model? And that's going to mean, whether it's NIL in the way that it's currently been operating the last couple of years, where we have a couple of collectives that support our student athletes and provide opportunities for them, which is primarily a fundraising mechanism, where there's money that is being fundraised and that is passed through the collective and shared with our student athletes. We do have more than a handful of student athletes that are doing quite well in what I would say is traditional name, image, and likeness, where they are partnering and doing things for corporations or businesses that see a benefit in engaging our student athletes. And I think that that's going to grow as we move forward. NIL is still relatively new, but there's hundreds of millions of dollars that's going through the system and supporting student athletes around the country. And so that goes back to that brand and platform that we talked about. And that's why it's a really good thing that UConn is in the position that we're in, where you have a national brand, people recognize it. And in the state of Connecticut, people have come to appreciate the fact that engaging student athletes in this way can benefit their business or company. So, but revenue sharing will be different, because revenue sharing is just taking a percentage of our revenues that are being generated by a particular sport and sharing them with those individual student athletes. And so we are very much following what's going on nationally within the different conferences and making sure that we understand how people are going to be approaching this, that we look at as peers and we want to be competitive with. And as we have shown the ability to, UConn has always found a way to step up to the plate. And regardless of if that's our donors and fans, or if it's the state, or if it's our university, there's been a level of support provided that allows us to continue to compete at the highest level.
For sure. I had one question that's, I think, completely relevant to the NIL conversation. Does UConn have any mechanism where you provide some financial literacy for student athletes that come in and have these NIL opportunities, whether it be in men's basketball, women's basketball? Typically football are the three that are most probably getting the kind of the larger investments into their opportunity to play at UConn. Just curious. I don't know if it's the parent in me and understand and wanting to know of the student athlete and the kids that are getting this money, understand with that becomes like responsibility and how to manage it. I'm curious if that's being done, or if it's done almost kind of comparted to, just basketball handles it or football handles it individually. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Mark, it's a great question because, ultimately, I think for anybody that attended college, that you typically have a traditional set of, core classes or curriculum that you have to take, or you get to choose. And while, there's a lot of very important courses, I think financial literacy, not just for our student athletes, but for any young individual on our campus, financial literacy is, as core as anything moving forward. So what I would tell you is we do a lot of individual things right now relative to trying to expose our student athletes to good behavior when it comes to how to manage money, but we have to become much more intentional and much broader as it relates to educating I generally our student population, but specifically, our student athletes, as they have all of these opportunities. And so working with our provost, Ann DeLeva, working with John Elliott in the College of Business, working with David Noble and the Worth Institute, we are trying to develop curriculum around financial literacy and a lot of other things that will touch this whole concept of whether it's revenue sharing or NIL moving forward, because it's as core to anything that we need to be doing from an educational standpoint moving forward.
That's great to hear. Listen, David, I really appreciate you coming on for a few minutes today. You've done a good job of answering questions that are on most people's minds. And again, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Listen, this has been another episode of Locked On UConn. For David Benedict, I'm your host, Mark Zanetto, asking you to stay locked in, stay connected, make sure that toughness meter is always rising. And as always, go Huskies. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Mark.